Hi, Kate.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks for having me, and hi, Scott, as well.
Hi, Kate. Thanks for joining us. I think most people in the industry know you, Kate Bernot, writer for Good Beer Hunting, the Sightline section. But for people who may not know your full background, maybe we could start just by sort of you giving a little bit of detail on that.
Sure. So I got my start covering beer as a reporter for a daily newspaper in Chicago a few years ago. And then from there, I went on to be the beer editor at Draft Magazine. Um, then I worked as an editor for The Takeout. And now I am, yes, a contributor to Sightlines with Good Beer Hunting, and I'm also a contributing editor at Craft Beer and Brewing. So you'll see my words around.
What first got you your interest in beer?
I was actually really interested in food in college and right when I graduated. I thought I wanted to go to culinary school. I applied to culinary school and decided that wasn't exactly the path I wanted to go, and I should probably use the journalism degree that I had. But my interest in food got me into beer because there were in Chicago at the time so many chefs who were doing interesting beer collaborations and expanding the beer lists on their restaurant menus. And I just realized that there was so much more to beer than I had previously thought. And then the more I started reporting about it, the more I fell in love with it, and it took over everything else.
Nice.
Yeah.
So we wanted to spend part of the time today talking about COVID, of course.
Hmm.
And maybe a good place to start is what's the most interesting adaptation to a brewery make?
Oh wow. Um, I think that some of the just scrappiness has been so impressive. It's not that they're necessarily building rocket ships or anything, but just like that they're able to adapt so quickly. So I reported for Good Beer Hunting a piece about e-commerce solutions, and Torch and Crown is a brewery in New York that was able to piece together their online ordering and sort of delivery tracking software in like 3 days. And they happened to have some software programmers on staff, so that was a boon to them. But
It's an easy.
they wrote that code themselves. They like put together all these different like payment processing and logistics software together to make this. And I think there are lots of examples of that, of breweries just like super thinking fast on their feet and moving really quickly. Different types of like pallet joint pallet sales in North Carolina has been interesting too. Breweries coming together to offer like mixed pallets of beer to people, mixed cases. That's really cool. So yeah, I applaud all those people thinking really fast on their feet.
Yeah. I saw a story you wrote earlier this week about state regulations changing. And that
Mm.
story was sort of about the frequency with which some states are changing those regulations
Mm-hmm.
back and
Yeah.
forth. I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious, what loosening of a regulation have you found to be most interesting?
Yeah. I mean, I think just on an overall level, with liquor, not specific to beer, and then I'll get into beer, but um, Texas, which I mentioned in that piece, loosened its laws to allow restaurants to sell liquor to consumers in manufactured sealed containers. So, you could sell me, a restaurant could sell me to go, a customer, a small package of vodka and all the trimmings to go home and make a cocktail with it or whatever, which is
Mhm.
interesting. People in Texas, the restaurants are saying it doesn't go far enough. They'd like to sell non-manufacturer sealed alcohol. But I just think that's such a it's an interesting, Texas liquor laws don't move quickly. So that was kind of interesting to see. And then regarding beer, I mean, I think the home delivery thing is huge. I think that's going to have implications beyond this crisis, and it's certainly something consumers want. I guess the question with that I'm sort of watching is whether that's something that breweries will want to continue doing once they can reopen their tap room, it's like, is it really still worth it to your bottom line to be making deliveries out of the back of your Subaru, or is that more of a time suck than it's worth? But if they can partner with third party delivery, I think that's where it becomes interesting. In states where that's legal, it's like, okay, if you could be delivering beer via Postmates or Uber Eats or something like that, might be worth keeping around. So I'm keeping an eye on the home delivery laws, and it'll be interesting to see where those go.
Yeah, and if we revert back to them not being allowed the direct to consumer from a brewery.
Yeah, I think it's hard. I think it's hard to undo those changes. I think once consumers start to expect them, it's hard to, I think, put the toothpaste back in the tube. Like, that's happened. We haven't, society hasn't collapsed as a result of me getting a crowler delivered to my door. So I think it'll be hard to go back to the way things were after that. So
Yeah. Have you seen any shifts in how breweries have been marketing during this COVID period?
yeah, so actually that was my story for Good Beer Hunting today. So it's, I think, it's a really desperate time for a lot of breweries, and their duty to their business and to their employees is to sell as much beer as they possibly can. And who could fault them for that? With that, though, people are also, customers and retail partners and restaurants and all that are experiencing, unprecedented hardship and anxiety and fear. And it's a weird time to be marketing and selling an intoxicant with potentially addictive properties. So that's what my piece for Good Beer Hunting was about today, was sort of like, how do you take a step back and, as a brewery, be mindful of the struggles that your retail partners and your customers are going through, but still do your job marketing and selling your beer. And I think what it comes down to is being like honest and being like a human, even though you're a company, like acknowledging people's anxieties and not promoting beer as like a solution to them or as a crutch to stand on, but as a way to make the good times better, and
Mhm.
as a small moment of normalcy in a way. And I think, that line is a fine line to walk. But I think if a producer goes into it with that mindset of being thoughtful and of trying to promote moderation and health as much as possible, then you're already doing the right thing. And then other than that, I mean, obviously it's moving things virtually, trying to replicate the community and events around beer in a virtual space. And that's been really cool to see breweries do virtual happy hours, do virtual tastings, like still keep their customers engaged and still keep people busy in a way, like giving them an activity to do while they're drinking. I think makes it seem less like drinking for drinking's sake and more like an experience and a communal kind of ritual. So I think also promoting beer in the context of food is really great during this time. That's like a healthier way to think about beer as like a counterpart to a meal and stuff like that. So I think that's a nice way breweries can keep promoting their product, but do it in like a context that's more healthy. So
Yeah. Are you seeing consumers like any kind of shift in drinking habits right now? Are people going more for comfort beers, things that are tried and true and reliable rather than
yeah,
the new
totally.
thing?
I mean, I think people are just drinking more in general. Although we've seen in the IRI data that the immediate stockpiling behavior has kind of stopped, and people are reverting back a little bit more towards the like normal purchasing habits. They're still elevated. Alcohol sales were up 17% versus a year ago for the week ending April 9th. So it's still, people are buying more than usual, but like that crazy peak has kind of passed. But I do think there has been a big advantage to the sort of larger established producers. And I think that's based on price, availability, and then familiarity. So price, I mean, those larger brands are more able to, have price flexibility and discount. Availability, I also tend to see that like national and regional breweries are the ones who are on the Drizzlies of the world or on grocery store e-commerce sites. So consumers are just more able to see those, I think, during this pandemic as people are home and shopping online. And then lastly, I do think familiarity is playing into that a little bit. People are kind of sticking with the things that they like and they know. My colleague Brian Roth has done a lot of reporting on this for Sightlines, and he noted that brands like Boston Lager, Lagunitas IPA, Shiner Bock, New Belgium, Fat Tire all had really big bumps in March versus a year ago. And I think that's just like people know it, it's there in the grocery store or it's there on the e-commerce platform. A lot of times those might be also in like larger format packages that people can buy 15 packs or 30 packs, which seem like a good bet right now. So I don't know if it's like consumer psychology in that they're like, oh, during times of crisis, I will revert to Fat Tire because it's cozy. I think it's more just like it's there, it's where they're shopping, it's like staring them in the face, it's in the packaging they want, and yeah, it's like maybe a beer they have fond memories of. So I think it's all of those playing together.
We've really seen a lot of people in the industry, and this expands beyond beer, but really to hospitality, come together and start initiatives during this time period. Which of those has really impressed you so far?
Oh gosh, I've seen some really good like local initiatives that are benefiting. I think like the local community aspect of this is so important right now, because you really want to be giving back to the first responders or the frontline healthcare workers in your exact neighborhood. And I feel like it's those grassroots ones that have been really encouraging, not to discount like the national kind of things that people are doing, but I think those seem to like really connect with people in their local communities. And then even like this is such a small example, but it's so like such an example of like what the beer community is about, is I've seen brewers like sending each other beer on like just like personally, like I see them thanking each other like on Instagram or Twitter. It's like, oh, I didn't realize you were gonna send me a box of beer, like thank you so much. And I don't know, that's hardly the most important thing to be doing right now, but to me that really speaks to like what beer is about, like taking care of itself and taking care of like the people in its community who are like really having a hard time right now. So that's been just cool to see, because it's not for PR, it's not part of some big campaign. It's just like, hey, I wanted to send you a box of beer, thanks so much. So that's
Yeah,
been cool to see too.
totally authentic.
Yeah.
Awesome. I got some questions too.
Yeah.
And I'm excited because usually when I do these get-togethers, I talk mostly about COVID and the world now, and now I get to talk about sort of what could happen after. We talked about this a little bit already, but we're noticing, all of us, new sales trends that have grown or just gotten larger during this whole situation, delivery and online ordering. Do you think those things have a larger presence when we go back to whatever normal is? Do you think that, it depend? I mean, it depends so largely, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm wary, of course, of making projections about how things are going to look because we're still very much in it. But I do feel pretty confident saying that, online ordering and home delivery, I think, are here to stay. And what makes me feel that way is that one of the largest barriers to people buying beer online, where legal, so like laws number one, but in places where it's legal, consumers haven't been aware that they can buy beer online. Research has borne that out. Rabobank is a Dutch bank that's focused on alcohol and agriculture, and they shared some statistics that found 65% of online grocery shoppers living in places where it was legal to buy alcohol online didn't know it was even an option. So I think what the crisis is doing is showing people that it is an option, and therefore whenever we return to a more normal state, I think that awareness is still there, and like those behaviors seem more possible. And I think that is here to stay for sure. Grocery hasn't done a great job with e-commerce. Like very few Americans still, even now in this crisis, are buying groceries online, and it hasn't been a seamless process. So I think if I were a brewery moving forward after all of this, I would really be asking my retail partners, like, do you have an e-commerce presence? What does that look like? Do you have beer up there? Do you keep your stock up to date on your e-commerce? Like, that's a question that I think will become more important in the months and years after all of this. So,
right, hopefully, after all this.
Yeah, right.
Do you think some of those trends we just talked about, delivery, online ordering, wind up helping retail stores or breweries that can readily package beer quicker in the long run?
Yeah, it's an interesting, who wins from that is an interesting question. Right now, obviously, like the larger regional and national players are winning in that sphere because they have the presence, the infrastructure, the packaging already. But moving forward, that could be a space that even smaller breweries play in, because we're seeing the rollout of more software that's available to them. BeerMe, BIERMI, is a great new platform I just became aware of maybe last week. It is an online, basically order taking platform for small breweries, and it's entirely free. Yeah, so it was built by some developers like in response to this pandemic, and they are giving it away as far as I can tell. Two small breweries, they have like 70 something already signed up around the country. The average order placed on it, according to the creators, is like $40. So people are using it and ordering it, and so I think, as necessity is the mother of invention, we're going to see smaller breweries like have to figure this out, and then once they have the tools and customers are aware that this is an option, there are way fewer barriers to that. I think the question of like the online marketplaces like Drizzly and Minibar and those is interesting, because those right now are like almost completely dominated by larger brands, but the way that those services obviously execute their orders is through retailers. So if smaller independent retailers sign up to be partners with Drizzly and Minibar and such, like you could theoretically expand the pool of products that are available. So I just think it requires like consumer push, retailer buy-in. But this crisis is definitely accelerating interest in that for sure.
For sure. Yeah, and this is sort of my next question too, going back to delivery a bit, this mix of like convenience and safety that are intermingling. So when eventually the safety piece of it's removed, right, where people don't feel all that worried about going out, or like less worried than they do now, even after 6 weeks of being at home, how much do you think that delivery or Drizzly affects buying preference? Meaning, does the average person settle for what's available, or do they still travel to a local brewery to support that brewery in person?
I think it's not just two different kinds of like customers. Like there's always going to be that like super curious craft customer that's going to seek out whatever is new and interesting and different. But I think that's also two different kinds of like occasions, right? So if we make an analogy to restaurants, like because delivery exists doesn't mean people don't go out to restaurants or aren't interested in trying new restaurants, but like sometimes you're just going to order Domino's. Like it's just that kind of a night.
Yes.
So I think, there's I think there's the potential for both to live in harmony and even be like tools of the same consumer. Like some consumers will want to seek out new things and go to tap rooms and buy crowlers and whatnot, and then that same consumer some weekend might be just having a party and want some beer delivered quick, and that's where they got on Drizzly and order whatever is easy. So I think there's a potential for both.
Yeah, that makes sense. Something we're keeping a pretty close eye on. In the past few years, a lot of breweries have opened with the taproom model in mind. They want to keep it small. They want to only sell out of their taproom. Obviously, the crisis has changed that dramatically, especially for those types of breweries. I think that more breweries that will open in the coming years will all have some sort of distribution and model in place as a result of this.
I don't think all of them will. This was also something I reported on recently, was what does this whole thing mean for breweries and planning? I talked to many that were still proceeding with their sort of taproom focus model, and some of those were just sort of like a little bit late in the game to pivot. But I also think like the prevailing wisdom over the past 5 years has been that sort of own premise model, and it's hard to like really shift away from that dramatically. And like I think the longer though this crisis goes on, the more that will call that conventional wisdom into question. I think whether tap rooms stay the darlings that they always have been, I think this is showing that breweries really need to have a diversity of revenue streams and need to be thinking critically about what how those pieces all fit together, and what if one entire revenue stream was to be taken away from you, how could you quickly adapt to that? So I would be surprised if it doesn't lead to at least mobile canning being of greater interest to people, like at least having crowler machine. I mean, so many breweries do, but like these are very easy ways to at least ensure some form of beer to go move forward. I've seen these new twisty cans. Have you guys seen these? They're like,
I haven't.
No.
I've seen as a an alternative sort of to crowlers now, as some breweries are having trouble sourcing the crowler cans. So Twisty, it's TWISTEE, and it's like a 16-ounce can that has an oxygen scavenging pre-seamed top. So it's like you can fill it from the tap if you CO2 purge beforehand. So it's like there are just these innovations coming around that are like offering more to go options for breweries that aren't investing in full canning lines and things like that. And I think that's at least like sort of a backstop for breweries that if I were taproom focused, I'd be thinking about right now. So
that's awesome. My last question for you is a lot broader, sort of like freestyle for you, but and I'm sure you've thought about this a lot, but where do we go from here? Like, what do you think beer culture might look like after all this? And in terms of things like beer festivals, people going to tap rooms, sitting at bars, things like that we really took for granted for years. I've thought about what beer culture looks like after all this.
Yeah, I mean, I just maybe I'm just like a pessimist wet blanket. I don't know, but I'm really expecting this to take a long time. And I don't, people are like, can you believe Oktoberfest in Munich was canceled? I'm like, obviously.
Right.
So, I mean, like GABF this year, I don't know. So I think this is going to take a long time and will prove to be a significant turning point for the industry. I think a lot of breweries will close, and that pains me greatly. I think competition for people's beer dollars increases. I think pricing becomes much more important as the economy continues to be weakened. Like a $9.99 six-pack suddenly feels very different from like an $11.99 six-pack.
Mhm.
I think distributors really focus on high producing SKUs. Like SKU proliferation has been so out of control for years, and it's like this is a good excuse for them to just like focus on the ones that really move. So I just think it's going to be like a real shakeout. And then culturally, I think it behooves breweries to like really have that connection with consumers that isn't just like what's hot and new, but it's like something people really want in their fridges and want every day and want to drink with dinner. And like I think it makes those existing relationships much more important, because when times are hard, like who really cares if you have this snazzy new Instagram beer?
Yeah, yeah,
When
sure.
things are tough, you
Right.
really want the thing you like and the thing that feels good and that you have a connection to. So hopefully it benefits those breweries that have those really strong relationships with customers and that people really care about and want to see succeed. So if there's a silver lining, maybe that's it. Maybe it's that people will be really hopefully drawn towards those breweries that have always been important to them and been a part of good experiences for them.
Yeah, the ones that are actually community focused. I know most of them
Yeah,
say what they are, but you definitely see a difference between those that sort of walk the walk.
totally, totally. The ones where you've had great experiences, the ones where the tap room staff, that kind of thing. I think those become the ones that you're really going to give your dollars to when times are hard. So
Yeah.
that's a positive thing.
Yeah, totally.
So to move past COVID, or at least try to move past it and talk just
Try.
generally about beer.
How refreshing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
He's lying. I mean,
Yeah.
we were curious about what are some of the beer trends that you see coming over the next year or two, and not to
Mm,
contradict what I just said, but I realize some of that.
yeah.
But
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think even for the next year, trends will continue to be driven in part by this crisis. Like I think it's hard to separate like what beers will be successful from like the economic and health realities of what's happening. But that said, I am keeping an eye on a lot of like line extensions for popular products. We've seen that those are pretty successful for breweries. Like it's easier to create a variation of something that really works than to like reinvent the wheel.
mhm.
I think one example of that is like Sierra Nevada's Hazy Little Thing was such a hit. Now there's like an imperial version, a sour version, and it's like, yeah, people like that beer. It's been a huge hit for them. Like, why go back to the drawing board and create like a whole new beer when you can introduce something consumers are already like drawn to, but in a maybe expand their purchasing within your existing line. So that's something that I expect to definitely see more of. I don't think hard seltzer is going anywhere. People are buying a lot of it during this crisis, and then we'll be moving into summer. So I don't really expect that to go anywhere. I think it'll be interesting to see how that category segments itself. Like we're already seeing the mass market with like the White Claws and the Trulies, but now there are all these like more premium versions. There are
Mhm.
craft versions. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that category continues to create niches within itself. So yeah, my money is still on hard seltzer.
I think it's a safe bet.
Yeah, right. I'm not the first to say it.
So once we can go back to sort of normal travel, are there any
Mhm.
other any beer cities that you think have sort of flown under the radar that maybe will
Mm.
emerge on the map in the next couple of years?
Yeah, it's so weird to think about travel right now, especially because I think there will be sort of an interest in visiting smaller and more rural areas once travel is more possible. Like I think those will feel more appealing than like traveling to New York City.
Yeah.
So, but then that carries with it its own health risks. Like for those communities, I happen to live in like a somewhat smaller rural community in Missoula, Montana, and it's like I see people wanting to, you know, I can already imagine people wanting to come visit our national parks and things like that, which makes me a little bit nervous. But as for beer cities that I think people should really have on their radars once it is safe to visit places, which whenever that may be, I'm really interested in the Raleigh-Durham area. There's a lot of cool breweries there that I'm super interested in checking out and that I've heard great things about. And then kind of further extending that to like the whole triangle there. I'm just overdue for a North Carolina trip. And I think Asheville gets all the love there. And I love Asheville as much as anyone else, but I think there are other parts of the state that have been maybe overlooked because of Asheville's long shadow. And then I am also interested in, there are a lot of new breweries opening in Miami right now, which I think is cool. And they're all very geographically, like, especially in that area around J. Wakefield, like there's so many new breweries around there in that Wynwood area that are like so walkable from each other, which is really appealing. And especially if you're traveling like on vacation, it's really nice to be able to hit all of those breweries at once. So Miami is on my list too of places I need to revisit again. So yeah, those would be my two picks if I could get traveling again.
We're trying to be optimistic and look toward the future.
Totally.
We will travel again.
Even though we're all just playing hour by hour essentially at this point.
Right. Maybe I'll do some more. I need to like create like a Miami mood board or something to like keep my spirits up and imagine myself on a Miami vacation.
Yeah, totally.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time, Kate. Is there anything else that you think people would want to hear about that we haven't covered already?
Oh man, we really covered a lot, and these are great questions. I think it's just, I think what's happening now and the plates that are shifting are really important and will continue to have far-reaching consequences after this is over. So I think that's why it's such an interesting time to be paying attention to how things are changing. So I appreciate you guys giving me the chance to share some of my thoughts, and just grateful for the chance to talk to you guys. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks again, and I'm sure we'll talk soon. So stay safe.
Yeah, I hope we can cross paths sometime. That would be really nice to see you guys again. So thank you.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Very soon.
Thank you, Kate.
Bye.
Thanks, Kate. Bye.